What's up, fam? Welcome back to another exciting edition of Keith Walker Books Reads. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. All right, today I'm going to read you a poem. It is titled Slave Sale, New Orleans. It was written by Charles Reznikoff, who lived from 1894 through 1976. So Mr. Reznikoff, he was born in a Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn. He published his first two poetry collections. They were called Rhythms and Rhythms 2. This was in 1918 and 1919. And that was a small press in his parents' home. His first commercially published book of poetry, which was titled Poems, was published a year later in 1920. All right, so I'm going to offer an analysis of this poem after I'm done reading it. Slave Sale, New Orleans. You know, this is free verse. I should do better with free verse than I do with rhyming poems, but I don't. I hope I get through this okay. To begin with, the slaves had to wash themselves well, and the men who had beards had to shave them off. The men were then given a new suit each, cheap but clean, and a hat, shirt, and shoes. And the women were each given a frock of calico and a handkerchief to tie about their heads. They were then led by the man selling them into a large room. The men placed on one side, the women at the other, the tallest at the head of each row, and then the next in size, and so on to the shortest. Many called to look at the slaves for sale, and the seller kept talking about their qualities, made them hold up their heads and walk about briskly, and those who might buy them had them open their mouths to look at their teeth and felt their arms and bodies, just as they might a horse for sale, and ask each what they could do. Sometimes a man or woman will be taken to a small house in the yard to be stripped and looked at carefully. If they had scars of whips on their backs, that would show they had been troublesome. During the day, a number of sales were made, and a planter from Baton Rouge bought Eliza's little son. Before that, the boy had to jump and run across the floor to show his activity. But all the time the trade was going on, his mother was crying and wringing her hands and kept begging the man who was thinking of buying the boy not to buy him unless he bought her too, and her little daughter. And Eliza kept saying that if he did, she would be the most faithful slave that ever lived. But the man from Baton Rouge said he could not afford to buy her, and then she began to cry aloud in her grief. The man selling the slaves turned on her, his whip lifted, and told her to stop her noise. If she would not stop her sniveling, he would take her into the yard and give her 100 lashes. She tried to wipe away her tears but could not, and she said she wanted to be with her children and kept begging the man selling the slaves and the man from Baton Rouge, who by that time had bought her son, not to separate the three of them, mother, son, and daughter, and over again kept saying how faithful and obedient she would be and how hard she would work day and night. But the man from Baton Rouge said again he could not buy mother and son, let alone three, and that only the boy would go with him. Then Eliza ran to her son, hugged him, and kissed him again and again, and her tears kept falling on his face. The man selling the slaves kept cursing her and called her a blubbering, howling wench, and ordered her back to her place in line and to behave herself, or he would give her something really to cry about. Okay, so that's that poem. I'm pretty sure that anybody knows anything about slavery knows that slave sales happen, and they often happen in homes. And this is pretty much true to form about what they were. As far as analysis, this is free verse. There's some imagery going on here, but there's not a whole lot of poetic devices. I think what he was really focused on was the meaning and the words and the act and the horror behind the whole situation. He lays out a lot of details that a lot of people don't want to know about. It probably makes them feel uncomfortable to know that human beings, black people in America, in this country, were treated like this. In the beginning, to begin with, they had to wash themselves off well. If the men had beards, they had to shave them off. They got them all dressed up. It wasn't like a Armani suit. It was a new suit. It was cheap but clean. Hey, to make sure the women were pretty as well. Everybody had to basically look their best as they went in here, and they just lined them up, and people came in and started deciding which slaves they wanted to purchase. And as he said, it was like they were going out to look for a horse they may want to buy. They would lift their arms, look at their muscles, tell them to open their mouths, look at their teeth, ask them if they have any special skills or you're a good cook and things like that. Um, Interestingly, they made them sometimes go out back and they would strip them to see their backs because if they had scars from being whipped, that would mean they were troublesome. This is ironic, and I'll tell you why in a second. So when they went to Eliza had two children, a boy and a girl. And the man from Baton Rouge wanted to buy the boy, but he said he couldn't afford to buy the rest of the family, which that's as gut wrenching as they come as far as slave sales went. That's always the horror that they had to endure. A mother in particular, with someone want to buy her children without her, or one of the children go here, another child go here, and she goes to a totally different place. The whole aspect of ripping black families apart, I mean, they could care less. A slave at the time was not important enough for their families to be recognized, whether it be a marriage or even a mother's bond with her children. That's horrific. Also horrific, they made the boy jump up and down and run across the floor just to show that he was an active kid, just to show that he wasn't like crippled or anything like that. That happened, like in real life. That's embarrassing, obviously. That's degrading. And the mother started crying and wringing her hands. This happened often. And she was begging the man that if he was going to buy her son, he needs to buy her too. But of course, he said that he couldn't afford it. And that is the reality of it. Um, Also, very hurtful to read is when she starts begging him, saying that if he would buy her, she would be the most faithful slave that ever lived. I mean, if you can imagine a mother, a slave, going to that extreme to try to stay with her child, she'll do anything. Even, I mean, she's already a slave, but she'd be the most faithful slave. This man is putting her in a position of subjugation, a position of being enslaved, but she would be completely faithful to him and in debt to him. She would be in debt to him if he would simply buy her so she could remain with her child. So, of course, the guy that's selling the slave, he's not trying to hear it. He has absolutely no sympathy. He has a whip, and he tells her to stop her noise. If she would not stop her sniveling, he would take her to the yard and give her 100 lashes. Which brings me back to that other line earlier that I said was ironic. The slaves who had scars on them from being whipped, they were troublesome. But he would give her 100 lashes, which would later make her appear to be troublesome, and she would be considered troublesome simply because she wanted to keep her child. That's what a troublesome slave is. Um, Towards the end, we finally get the realization that this is truly going to happen. She's going to lose her son, and the man that is doing the slave sale, he kept cursing her. He calls her a blubbering, howling wench, and he said if she doesn't behave herself, he will give her something to really cry about. Which once again, ironic, because crying because someone is taking your child away, that is something to cry about, but not in his mind. But he would give her something to cry about if she chooses not to behave herself and let them sell her child. This poem is deep. It's hurtful. It's hard to read. It's hard to get through. It's hard to acknowledge that this is a part of American history, that it really happened, but we all know it did. Not just on one day. It happened day after day after day. It was a part of American life. So I want to ask a question for anyone out there who's watching this video who thinks that descendants of slaves today do not deserve reparations for slavery. I want you to post in a comment and tell me why. I'm not trying to start an argument with you. I'm just legit curious. We know that in America, when you wrong a certain person, um, compensating them financially is what's supposed to normally happen, whether it be a car accident or even if you assault someone, they could sue you for monetary value. When the slaves were freed, they were promised 40 acres and a mule so they could get on their feet. They'll have land, they could cultivate it, they could farm it, they got a mule. It's a start. And we know that they didn't give it to them. So seeing as how the slaves never got their 40 acres and a mule, why is the subject of reparations so taboo? Why is it that if someone brings up reparations, oh, here they go again. I'm speaking to people who are against it. You just don't want to hear it. And you think that it's, well, you know what? I'm going to tell you the arguments that you probably have right now. One, we should just move on. We should move on with our lives. Two, my family didn't own slaves. Why should I have to pay? I didn't have anything to do with that. Three, they're just going to waste the money. They're just going to go out and buy beer and strippers and shiny rims. All right, so those are your main three arguments of why black people today, descendants of slaves, shouldn't get reparations. We should just move on. We have moved on. I mean, me personally, I got a good job. I live in a nice neighborhood. I'm taking care of myself. I'm not on welfare of any sort. I have moved on. But did you guys move on? And I don't mean you personally. I mean you as a country. Did you move on? Because slavery ended in 1865. I don't remember Southern white America moving on that day. I remember, not that I was alive, but there was plenty of not moving on. There was plenty of subjugation continued. There was plenty of lynchings. There was plenty of Jim Crow. The Civil Rights Act didn't get signed until 1964. And that was way, way, way after we were free, right? Not me personally, obviously. But why should we move on? You can go out today. Mississippi still has a Confederate flag in their state flag. So we should move on, but okay. My family didn't own slaves. That's fine, but you could say the same thing about Native Americans. My family didn't slaughter the Native Americans, but they still got their reservations. They still have autonomous zones where they could build casinos and build some type of financial backing for their own people. The Japanese during World War II, they just locked them up because they were thinking, well, if you're Japanese, you might be a spy. I mean, they literally just locked up all these Japanese people. They got paid for that. They got compensated once they were free. It's not like America doesn't do it, but why when it comes to slaves? And the last one, they'll just waste their money. So what? Let's say that some of them will. That's the same argument if you would have given the actual former slaves 40 acres and a mule, and they sold their whole 40 acres and a mule for a bottle of moonshine. So what? They made that decision. So I don't get these arguments. And actually, I don't really want to have the argument. But if you would like to debate it with me, I'd love to hear it. How you can think about what happened to Eliza and her son, even though you may say it's just a poem. It happened. You know it happened. If you could listen to this poem and say they don't deserve anything, I want to know. I would like to. I'm open for discussion. Post a comment. Anyway, if you like this analysis, please hit the like button. Post a comment, not necessarily to argue with me about reparations, but anything you want to say. And if you just stumbled across this channel and you're not subscribed, this would be a great time to hit the subscribe button. I'd love to hear from you. See you around again. I appreciate your support, and I'll see you next time.